Choosing an insulin pump is one of the biggest decisions we make for diabetes management, and today I hope to help you decide which is best for you. Happy New Year, welcome back to Diabetech. I'm Justin, I have type 1 diabetes, and on this show, I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management with industry leaders, educators, and those thriving with diabetes. Joining me today is Gary Shiner. He's a certified diabetes care and education specialist and has lived with type 1 diabetes for nearly 40 years. He's the owner and clinical director of Integrated Diabetes Services, a practice specializing in intensive insulin therapy and advanced education for children and adults. I've got links to his practice and new podcast called Think Like a Pancreas in today's show notes. Gary and I get into everything you need to know about the automated insulin delivery pumps on the market. The iLet from Beta Bionics, Omnipod from Insulin, the tslim X2 and Mobi from Tandem, and Medtronic's 780G. We cover algorithms, form factor, which works best for who, compatible CGMs, pricing, warranties, and a lot more. If you have questions after this, I've got interviews with a lot of these companies about their products and the features on this podcast, so be sure to go listen to those. Just a few weeks ago, I had Tandem on to talk about the Mobi pump, the world's smallest tubed hybrid pumped system, Dexcom G7 support, and its future tubeless pump. New episodes of this podcast release every Monday on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, so be sure to follow wherever you prefer. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or content on my social media and YouTube channel is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with your physician before making changes to your healthcare. Before we get into the interview, I wanted to bring up my Patreon. I was looking for a way to create better quality content, put out more content on YouTube and the podcast and social media, and do bigger and better things. I want to go to Europe to the biggest diabetes tech conference in March. I want to report on the coolest diabetes technology there is, and do a lot more bigger and better things like going to the Omnipod factory. With your support, I can make these dreams and these goals happen. On Patreon, there's the option to sign up for a monthly subscription. Not only will it support my content, but you'll also get some added extras. You'll get Q&A exclusives that only live on Patreon. The questions come from you. You'll have access to the Diabetech community Discord, where you can speak to other people who are diabetechies like yourself and like me. You can also chat with me. But overall, what you'll be doing is helping push Diabetech further, helping me and my team create better content for you to watch and learn from. To sign up and support Diabetech, there's a link in today's show notes, and it costs about the same as 2 cups of coffee. All right, enjoy the episode. Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show to teach me and my listeners all about automated systems. There's a lot I don't know because I've been on Omnipod pretty much my whole diabetes life. So I'm excited to learn from you today.
And we had you try all those pumps and infusion sets previously, but you stuck with the Omnipod, huh?
Right. Yeah. I put all the infusion sets on. For those who haven't seen it, Gary and I did a whole episode on the podcast about infusion sets. So we're not going to really get into how those work in this episode, but definitely while you're considering new pumps, listen to that episode. But first, there are a lot of new pumps that have really arrived. So we have a longer list to get into. There is Tandem's new Mobi and a Beta Bionics iLet that have joined the market. So first, let's get into the playing field of automated systems. Let's start with Tandem's pumps. Let's start with the tslim.
Sure. I mean, it's one of 4 that we now have available to us in the U.S. commercially. The Tandem system, this was it was the first pump with a full-color touchscreen, nice compact pump, nice and slim, thus the name tslim. It's a traditional tubed pump with an infusion set. The system connects with the Dexcom G6 and G7. They just built the update for the G7 in the last few weeks, and they're offering that update up to their users. And it's one of the neat things with this system is when they update features and software, you don't have to get a whole new pump. You can just plug in and install it through a download and take advantage of the latest and greatest. So the algorithm that's built in to the Tandem pump, automatically adjusts the insulin delivery. It'll make basal adjustments. It'll even administer small correction boluses when glucose is going particularly high to try to keep the user in range.
And then we've got the Mobi, Tandem's brand new pump. Mm-hmm. Tell me about this one. There's no screen on it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Tandem pump junior. It does pretty much all the same things as the larger version. It's just a more compact version. It doesn't have any programmability other than one button you can use for manually bolusing if you didn't have your phone with you with the app. But the phone app is set up similarly to the way the Tandem pump programs. All the same features. The pump itself, just like the Tandem tslim, has the Control IQ algorithm built in to self-adjust. So the data from the Dexcom will feed directly into it. It'll automate the adjustments. But bolusing, setting changes, looking at history, all that has to be done through the phone app that's associated with it.
Cool. And then there's Medtronic. What makes Medtronic different than, I guess, all the others?
Not a lot. I mean, it's a tubed pump. Medtronic was the first in the industry to have an automated system. It's going back a good almost 10 years now. They haven't done much to change the hardware. They're still using a similar pump that they had back then. And their sensor has been updated from the standpoint of just the algorithm and how the signal is being interpreted, but the hardware is very similar to the way it's been for a long time. I think what's really unique now with Medtronic is at the other end is the infusion set. They have new extended wear sets that kind of do less harm below the skin. It ensures that the insulin getting into your body is cleaner and purer, so there are fewer issues at the sites. And that's often the weak link in pump therapy is the infusion below the skin, where the insulin's not as clean or as pure as it should be, and it causes local irritation and inflammation, and that can affect the absorption of the insulin. And it's a variable that can wreak havoc on some people's control or just add a lot of unpredictability to others. So the infusion device is something that Medtronic really has a grip on right now with their new extended wear set.
Okay. And then we've got Beta Bionics iLet. This one relatively new.
It's also a tubed pump. It only has a couple of infusion set options. There's a plastic cannula that goes in at 90 degrees or a steel needle that goes in at 90 degrees. The pump itself is extremely simple to use. The user only puts their body size, their weight in. They don't put in basal settings, or they don't physically bolus or calculate boluses on this. They just let the unit know when they're eating. And the system makes its own adjustments to the insulin delivery and administers boluses that it feels are reasonable for the situation. So we'll talk a little more later about how the algorithms compare. But this one, it's designed with simplicity in mind.
Okay. And then the last one, Omnipod 5, the only non-tubed pump currently on the market in the US. I wear that. Tell me about that one.
Right. So Omnipod, they're on their fourth generation pod. This one's called the Omnipod 5. The pod itself attaches to the skin. There's a small cannula that pops out of the pump into the body, and there's a programmer. Now, the programmer for the pump can take the form of a handheld unit that the company provides, that Omnipod provides, or it can take the form of a smartphone app. Right now, they have the apps available for Android devices, and they're about to launch their iPhone app as well. So the programming of the pump is done through this. Now, this also, it syncs up with the Dexcom sensor, and the pod itself has the algorithm built in to make automated adjustments based on the glucose direction and the current level. But all of the bolusing, setting adjustments, and so on is done through either the company provide programmer or the smartphone app.
Okay, gotcha. And let's get into water resistance. The Omnipod, I swim with that. I shower with it. So that one I believe it's got a good rating. It can be underwater for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's what I love about it. What about, well, is there anything to add to that? And then what about the other pumps?
Well, the pods are fully watertight. I mean, these suckers are tough. I've tried breaking these open just to get to some of the innards and see what's in there.
Same.
You need a chisel and a hacksaw to get these things open. I wouldn't try that on the other pumps. You'll destroy them. But yeah, this is a tough, watertight little device. The other pumps are what's called, they're all water resistant. When they leave the factory, they're watertight, but there's gaskets and there's washers and things. And with wear and tear, sometimes water can seep in and may cause damage. They all have safeguards to prevent against accidental insulin delivery. So you're not going to get a little water in your pump and it's going to give you 50 units of insulin. They're not going to do that. But they could fry. I mean, you could burn out the motor, the electronics, things like that. The good news is the companies are all very good about replacing these things. If you have a problem, you just call their 24-hour helpline. They'll get a replacement out to you immediately. You might have to switch to injections for a day, but that's the worst case scenario. So, all of them can be used in and around the water, but the only one I would fully trust would be the Omnipod.
Who are you recommending wear these pumps? Let's start with Medtronic. Who should be wearing that one?
Yeah, the way I look at these systems with the automated adjustments that they all make is each one has a unique level of control that it can achieve. And some of them can get very tight glucose control. Some of them just get modest glucose control. But at the same time, each one has a certain amount of involvement the user has to put in. And that saying work in equals work out or results is very true. The systems that require some user involvement and intervention can generate better results. And each of these systems has its own degree of work that's involved in using it. And I would say of the 4 systems that are out there right now, the Tandem can probably achieve the tightest glucose control. However, there's a little more user involvement involved to get it right. The basal settings on the Tandem really need to be fine-tuned because it doesn't just produce a flat basal rate and adjusts from there. The Tandem pump also allows the user to still deliver boluses in an extended manner instead of all at once. It allows the use of multiple profiles. So for work days, off days, vacations, sick days, things like that, you can have different profiles. But these are the kind of things that require some engagement by the user. And of course, at meal times, you still have to enter the carbs and calculate a bolus. So the Tandem, I guess, relatively speaking, requires a little more effort on the user's part. But from my experience, the glucose control we can achieve with it is pretty darn good. So if it's somebody who doesn't mind being involved in their day-to-day management and wants tight control, I would steer them likely towards Tandem. And I like also the fact that it uses the Dexcom G6 or G7. There's flexibility there. And from in the sensor, in the CGM space, I've never met anyone who prefers Medtronic to Dexcom. It just doesn't happen. There may be a few people out there, but I've not met them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and for those listening, if you don't know, Medtronic, they have their own proprietary CGM. They work within their own system.
Current one's called the Guardian 4. And I mean, the sensor itself, the accuracy is reasonable. It's pretty close to Dexcom, but there's just inserting it and taping it and managing it and charging the transmitters. And it's a lot of work, just a lot of extra work. And until recently, it required calibrations, and it still asks for calibrations a bit more than Dexcom does. So just more work and effort involved. And it's not as reliable or consistently reliable from what I've seen and experienced compared to Dexcom.
Do you tend to find that the people on Medtronic are people who have been with Medtronic but it's not really new people aren't really getting on Medtronic as much these days?
Yeah, I'd say there's two populations that are using the latest Medtronic system. One is people who have been with Medtronic, like you said, generation after generation of their system and have just upgraded and upgraded and upgraded without really giving consideration to other options. And you get comfortable with something, it's understandable. And the other group are people who work with healthcare providers that may not be giving them options. They might just have a comfort level with Medtronic as a product, and that's all they prescribe and all they give information on. So I think it's a disservice not to give the user the info so that they can make their own decision. So I would put Tandem at the little more engagement, but really good results. And at the opposite extreme would be the iLet. With iLet, you don't have to figure out any settings. A novice could use this. Primary care providers can stick people on this. They don't need any expertise at all. You put your weight in, and after a week or so, it's making aggressive adjustments on your behalf. It's adjusting basal and it's calculating your own boluses. You don't actually enter carbs into this either. You just tell it when you're eating. And if you happen to be eating a bigger or smaller lunch than usual, you tell it that. That's it. It estimates your insulin needs based on just that information, and that's all. So from a user engagement and involvement standpoint, this is as simple and easy as it gets. But, it's always a but, right?
Yeah.
But what you got to give up in terms of the degree of glucose control you can achieve. You're not going to get as tight a control with this as you can with the other systems. It's making conservative estimates. It doesn't give you the option of adjusting for exercise or any other variables that come along in your daily life. It just has its one own algorithm that it runs pretty much constantly. The other systems all have at least some overrides you can do for special situations. And I would put Medtronic probably a little closer to Tandem in terms of the outcomes, the glucose control that you can achieve with it. And even though it doesn't allow you to use a lot of the advanced features that Tandem allows when you're in automated mode, I do feel there's a little more work involved in using it because of the sensor. It's just kind of it's a needy sensor. It has to be changed every 7 days. The transmitter's got to be charged each time. The calibrations aren't an absolute necessity, but oftentimes the system will request them just to keep it functioning well, and just inserting and getting the sensor placed initially is kind of burdensome. And the pump itself I find it's kind of awkward to program. A lot of button pushing, a lot of menus to go through.
The Medtronic, right? Yeah, I've heard that the usability is not so easy. People who are in the system, they've been using it so long, they've gotten it down, but it's not the most user-friendly.
The clip is upside down. I don't know who they were talking about when they engineered this thing, but when a user goes to look at their pump screen, it's upside down when they've got it clipped on their pants.
Oh, wow.
Little things like that. And then the Omnipod 5, I would put somewhere, kind of between Medtronic and iLet. The glucose control you can achieve, it's certainly better than iLet, but I don't think it's as good as you can get with Tandem and Medtronic. But there's less work involved. You do have to get your initial settings in there correctly, but it kind of takes away a lot of options that the other systems offer up. You can't extend boluses or run temp basals or other profiles. You just can't do things like that with the Omnipod. It does have one feature I do like is it'll adjust boluses based on the direction the glucose is headed. The other systems don't do that just yet. So if your glucose is rising going into a meal, the calculated bolus will be increased a little bit. And if it's falling, it'll decrease it a little bit. But from a convenience standpoint, the pod's wonderful. The pump itself is very simple to use, easy to change out. Because you don't have to insert infusion sets on your own, you can place it on all kinds of body parts. You just stick it on and it pops the cannula in for you. That part's nice. having to carry a separate programmer around isn't the easiest thing, though. That bothers a lot of people. So some are waiting until the iPhone integration with their app. But
yeah, that'll make it more a lightweight device, kind of just having it on, not having to have an extra device. You always, almost always we have our phones. On a hardware side, why would you recommend Omnipod to someone? Like who are the people who use that for that flexibility, I guess, or like tubeless feature?
Well, I think about people who might have to be connecting and disconnecting quite a bit, people who work out a lot, engaged in water activities, might have really active lifestyles. The pod's a nice tool. So when you have to disconnect for different activities, you're interrupting insulin flow. Glucose levels can do some strange things. And there's a time limit to how long you can be disconnected for safely. Because the pod's on you all the time, you don't have to worry about that. Just about any activity you can engage in. The only sport I've come across where even the pod is a problem is wrestling. Because people will grab on anything for leverage when they're wrestling against you, and they'll pull your pod right off if given the opportunity. So, but just about any other activity, it works nicely. I'd say also people who have any kind of dexterity challenges, older people with visual limitations, strength issues, because you don't have to insert your own infusion sets. You don't have to be priming tubing. All those steps are taken away. So there's a simplicity to the change outs that's quite nice.
Yeah, I found that after doing my infusion set video, which was separate from our podcast, just trying all of them on, it was a process putting all these on and having, for some of them, having to see the needle. And I'm sure people have become desensitized by that at this point, but I feel so spoiled. I put this thing on, it does its thing. I push up my skin a little bit. It does its thing. I barely feel anything. And it's nice not having to do that. And I could see a lot of people benefiting that, less involvement, kids, the elderly, or those who have any sight types of impairments. When it comes to failure rate, what do we see? With the Omnipod, I've had maybe in 2 years, 5 to 10 fails where I'd say closer to 5 and sometimes after swimming, I find, or even while swimming, where the pump, it fails. It goes beep and it failed. How often are you seeing that with tubed versus, I guess, Omnipod?
Well, when that sort of thing happens with a tubed pump, usually it's just a matter of changing the little piece that's on the skin. The infusion set, you don't have to change out all of the tubing and the cartridge of insulin and lose the insulin that you had. It's just the little piece that's on the skin. So it's a simpler thing. If there is a problem with the device or the absorption, just to change that piece out. Also, the way it alerts you, if there's on any tube pump, if there's, let's say, an occlusion, you'll get an alert on screen, you confirm it, and you change out. The pod give us what we call screamers. The pod will just siren relentlessly while you have to go hunting for a paper clip to jam into this thing to shut that alarm off, which to me is kind of archaic and cruel and unusual punishment. I'd say the rate of sight issues is similar between the pods and traditional sets, but the rate of device issues is greater with the pods. It's pretty rare that a tubed pump is going to give you an alarm because this thing is broken or defective. It's very rare. But with pods, like you said, that might happen several times a year, in which case the whole pod has to be changed out. Yeah,
and I find that, these are times when I have to go home and get a new pump because I don't carry around pumps if I'm, out having a day. If I'm going on an overnight trip, that's different.
Yeah, I teach people to just carry a syringe with them, an empty syringe, because you can draw insulin out of your pod or your tube pump and give yourself little micro injections until you're home and can change everything out.
Yeah, I have started doing that. I haven't had to use it yet, but I told a friend I didn't ever carry stuff around, and she has type 1. She's like, take this, please, just hold on to this. You'll need it sometime. So I have that now. Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities, from research on technology, daily T1D management, and more. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. When it comes to getting started on these, each one's a little bit different, right? First, there's the iLet, which we hinted at a little bit. The iLet only requires weight, and that's it, right? Mm-hmm. How long does it take for that one, I guess, to kind of get things down and understand your body?
Initially, it's going to be making conservative estimates, at least of bolus insulin needs, and it'll estimate basal. Usually after a few days, it's going to start to hone in a bit and learn. It's the one system that really has a learning algorithm. It looks at like what's happening overnight while you're sleeping, and if your glucose is starting to climb at 3 a.m., it will build a little extra basal in at that time to prevent the rise. None of the other systems have that capability. With the bolus doses, if you are programming at lunchtime, a normal lunch, and your glucose is often dropping, it'll start giving you less when you enter a normal lunch. So that sort of thing, it'll start happening after a few days, but it's constantly updating and including recent information into its algorithm to fine tune.
Okay, and what about Omnipod 5?
It takes a little bit longer. It doesn't really do much until after the first full pod use. So we're looking at really 3 days until the true automation is taking place. It'll start collecting data when you turn it on, but isn't really doing much. And then with each pod use, it updates its information based on how much insulin you're using. That's an important parameter. The more insulin you use, the less sensitive you are to each unit. So it starts making adjustments to the magnitude of corrections and the magnitude of basal adjustments it's making based on how much insulin you've been using recently, which can be a problem. Now, for somebody, let's say you're sick, or a woman having, it's premenstrual and the insulin needs go up a lot, it's going to keep doing that for a while, even after you're back to your normal insulin requirements. And likewise, if you start exercising a lot, all of a sudden it's basing things on when you weren't exercising, and you might be getting a little too much insulin.
How do you combat something like that?
You can go into manual mode. You just turn off the automated features for a short while and manage put yourself in Justin mode and just use your basic settings and your skill levels. So it bothers me when people go on these and don't have self-management skills, because there are times when you shouldn't be automatically adjusting. All of the systems give you the option of going back into manual mode except the iLet. The iLet does not have that option.
Interesting. Would you say this learning system of the Omnipod 5, and does this exist on other ones, does that hinder it for that reason, that it's going to apply what it's learned the last, I guess, couple weeks on this future? We get sick, and when we get sick, we have more insulin needs. I don't want to go into manual mode. On my system, I'm DIY. I never go into manual mode. I put on overrides, which are different ranges and targets. Are people going into manual mode after 2 weeks of being sick? Is that what they actually are doing, or?
Depends who's instructing them. Most people don't, and their glucose control suffers.
Wow.
We teach people about these scenarios and how to handle them, and hopefully they are doing that. I mean, they report to us that they are, and it does help. So having self-management skills is still necessary. You still need to know how to count carbs well. You still need to know how to manage your infusion sites properly, how to troubleshoot effectively, how to adjust for exercise. These are skills that you still need and still have to apply even using systems like this.
Okay, and what's the setup like for let's start with Medtronic, then we'll go to Tandem. What's getting on that like?
Getting on the system with Medtronic, it's kind of a process because you have to be instructed on the pump, and then you have to be instructed on their sensor. And it is a lot to learn with the sensor. It's not like a Dexcom where you just hit a button, it's on, you activate it, and you start getting data. The Medtronic, there's a lot more steps and a lot more processes involved in using it properly. And typically they'll start somebody on the pump and then bring them back a second time to start on the sensor, and then bring them back a third time to start the algorithm, to start the self-adjustment features running. So it's a bit more work than we see with the other systems. With Tandem, and again, I think most people are on a Dexcom already who have type 1, or they're on a Libre, but the Dexcom and Libre there's a lot of similarities. It's easy to switch from one to the other. So with Tandem, we can start the pump the day of you get it, and it links with your sensor, and the algorithm kicks in immediately. There's no learning process. It doesn't need to understand, that much about you and your insulin requirements. When you set up the Tandem algorithm, you tell it how much insulin you average per day, just one number you put in, and it bases its initial correction doses on that number you put in. And then over time, it does adjust if your insulin needs do start to change quite a bit. But that's a fairly easy one to get started with. And the Omnipod is also, it's fairly easy, although it doesn't really start making robust adjustments until after 3 days of pod use. Tandem's adjustments are less based on, preset formulas than it is on your glucose. I mean, it's just based on it's a predictive model purely. If it thinks in the next half hour you're going to be above 160, it bumps you up. Above 180, it bumps you up your basal and gives you a small correction dose. And if you're going to drop below like 110, it starts backing off a little bit. It's a very simple algorithm. Sometimes simple is good. Just the simplified version does work pretty nicely.
When it comes to targets, all of these have different either ranges or just a target number. How important is that number for the target? Does that, or does that not really matter? Is it more about the algorithm getting you there?
I think it matters quite a bit, especially when it comes to preventing hypoglycemia. I use a similar system that you do, and when I had my target set at 100 or even 110, I found I was going low too often. I got it to 120, and the lows almost completely vanished. So that was for me. But the target it is important, for preventing lows, and just based on the degree of control you're seeking, how tight or how loose you want to be, having a variety of options is valuable. The only system now that doesn't allow some flexibility with the target is Tandem. Because it has this one formula depending on where you're headed, but it does have overrides. It has one override to make the algorithm less aggressive and one algorithm to make it a little more aggressive. They call it exercise mode or sleep mode. Sleep mode's a little more aggressive. So you'd still have those options.
What about the other pumps when it comes to different, I guess, target settings? Let's start with Omnipod.
Yeah, I mean, you have a few different targets you can set. I believe you can go anywhere from 100 to 150. Medtronic, I think, is between 100 and 120. Don't quote me. Well, you're quoting me, but I'm quoting myself.
Do the research, everyone, but
do your research. I think those are the ranges. I don't remember 100%. And I think even with iLet, you have a couple of options, like 100, 110, 120.
Are they specific? Like, I know Omnipod has activity feature. Do they have a different one too? I haven't used Omnipod 5.
Yeah. The Omnipod 5 has the exercise mode, where the algorithm becomes a little less aggressive. It lowers what's called the adjusted basal setting by about 50%. and it doesn't start correcting until you're, I think, over 140 or something. So everything's more conservative in the exercise mode on Omnipod.
Okay.
Just like it's similar to Medtronic, it has what's called a temp target, where you just temporarily take whatever your normal target is and changes it to 150 for a while. Same concept.
Yeah, and then I know with the iLet kind of takes out a lot of the user. Like there are different targets, but they don't even tell you what the targets are, right?
Right. Yeah, and I haven't had a chance to personally use iLet yet, but I envision when I work out, and I work out every day, I'm either going to have to lie to it about how much I'm eating beforehand so I get a smaller bolus, or I'm going to need to eat carbs before and not tell it, or I'm going to need to disconnect for a while before I wear it, but I'm going to have, or maybe just raise the target a little bit. I don't think that'll help that much, but yeah, I'm going to have to get creative about how to handle workouts on the iLet.
Is there any real world data between all of these pumps for time and range? Have some of these pumps been found to be better overall at controlling and having better time and range?
Yeah, some are a little better than others. And again, these are broad averages that they look at of time in range of 70 to 180. The Tandem and the Medtronic are in like the low to mid 70% range. Omnipod is close to 70%, and iLet is down around 60%. You asked before about who I'd recommend what to. I don't want you to think that iLet wouldn't be recommended. I mean, if I had a client who was running a double-digit A1C, didn't really care to monitor their food intake, didn't exercise much, the iLet would really help them. It would improve their glucose control quite a bit. It wouldn't get them to Justin levels per se, but it would really improve things, and it might simplify their lives, not having to make any adjustments on their own. So I think for each there's a system that would meet their needs well and has the right kind of combination of features. The really people who want the really tight control, I wouldn't even recommend any of these. I would recommend one of the open source DIY type algorithms that allow full functionality, full adjustment, and fine tuning on one's own.
Yeah, for people who are interested in a DIY system, the pumps that work with that are Omnipod Dash and the prior model Eros, and then some old Medtronic pumps that I don't even know which ones they are, but I believe you and I are both on DIY systems. Mm-hmm. I'm actually on a different one than you right now, I think, and we'll talk about this later. We don't have time for it now, but you kind of we were getting into usability a bit. Let's start with that, the iLet, which we kind of just ended off with. Usability wise, like that is the most simplistic. That is meant for someone who really doesn't want to think much, right? But what is the usability? What is the use like that? Like when it comes to, I guess, logging carbs and beyond?
You don't. If you tell it if you're having your usual breakfast, usual lunch, or usual dinner, or if you're having a bigger than normal meal or a smaller than normal meal, that's it. And if you don't tell it that you're having a meal, it's not the end of the world. Your glucose will still rise a bit, but the algorithm catches on pretty quickly and keeps you from going excessively high. And that was one thing I found with the Medtronic that also worked pretty well. I tested it. I had some decent high carb meals and didn't tell it I was eating. And I don't think my glucose got much above 180 with any of those meals before the algorithm kicked in, gave me extra insulin, and got me back down towards normal a few hours later. So yeah, if you don't announce your meals with these systems, your blood sugar will rise a modest amount. If you're not on one of these systems and you eat 60 grams of carb, kiss it goodbye. You're going up to 300. But with these systems, you might go up to 200. So it is a little better. So they call that missed meal forgiveness or something like that. I would say it's probably best with the Medtronic, second best with the iLet, and third with the Tandem and Omnipod.
Okay. And then when it comes to the Mobi is Tandem's super small pump, smaller than my AirPods case, doesn't have a screen on it. Using this is much different than any of the other ones, right? Well, I guess Omnipod also doesn't have onboard controls.
It's not that much different. It's like using a tube pump. It is still a tube pump, but the tube's only a few inches long. So you could put the pump in a little pouch and stick it to your skin the way an Omnipod is used. So as you're going around wearing it throughout the day, there's no big strand of tubing. There's nothing clipped to your body. So from that standpoint, it's less conspicuous and less in the way than a traditional tube pump would be. But other than that, I mean, everything about it's the same. You still have to put in an infusion set. You got to rotate your sites. You got to fill the tubing, and you have to do all the programming. In this case, the programming is done through an app. So it's just the app versus doing it on the pump itself. So I've told a lot of patients about the Mobi, a lot of Tandem users, just to get their feedback about it. I'd say half of them are pretty excited about it. They like the smaller size, the discretion that it offers, being able to program through their phone. The other half have no interest. They're like, I don't want to use my phone for all my diabetes stuff. I'd rather just have my pump be able to program that. And they don't mind the tubing. And that's the case. Most people who use tube pumps get comfortable with it. It doesn't get in the way as much as most people think. So they're used to tubing. It doesn't bother them. They like the convenience of being able to program their pump right on the pump itself and not have to carry a second device around. There's also the issue of how much insulin they hold. The Mobi doesn't hold as much as the traditional pump. So I'd say somebody who's using, let's say 40 units a day, or maybe even 50 a day or less, there's enough in the Mobi to get them 3 days. But if they're going to go through more than that much insulin, there may not be enough.
Yeah, and Omnipod also has a max. The Mobi and the Omnipod both have a max of 200 units in the pump. What I like about the Mobi is you can wirelessly charge this. You can also wirelessly charge the iLet. I guess the Medtronic and the Tandem, those you're still plugging in with a cord.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, the Medtronic uses a AA battery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes the pump heavy.
Oh, wow.
It's the AA battery. And the size also. You got to be able to fit a AA battery in there. It makes it kind of bulky. So when you compare,
it sounds archaic to me, actually. Wow, it's much thicker than the tslim.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. And then when it comes to the Medtronic, you're also charging the sensors, whereas I guess all the other pumps don't require, they have, sensors you just throw out when you're done.
Right. So their sensor has a transmitter. I'll wedge this apart. Yeah, the transmitter part has to be charged after every sensor use. So every 7 days, you take your old sensor off, you charge this for about 20, 30 minutes. Then you go through the whole process of putting a new sensor on, which takes a lot of steps. Attach your transmitter and then start it up, and then you got your 2-hour wait. So it's really longer. You're looking at closer to 3 hours of no sensor data when you're using this.
Okay.
With the G7, you and I, we've already learned we can get the warm-up time down to 0 if we're smart about it, and there's no gaps in data at all.
Yep. All about overlapping the G7 sensors, which you can do. I have a video on that if you want to check that out. Let's real quick go through the CGMs that work. So Tandem and iLet both support the Dexcom G6 and the G7 as of this week or last week. You've got the Omnipod 5, which currently only supports the Dexcom G6 with G7 support coming eventually.
Yeah, probably first quarter of 2024.
Yeah.
Will be the G7 compatibility.
Okay. Medtronic only works with its proprietary Guardian sensor. They do have a new one in the works, the Instinct, which is way nicer. It is disposable. I did some videos on that, so if you want to hear about the future of Medtronic, check those out on my page. Libre 2 support. I spoke to Tandem. That episode went out a couple of weeks ago. So Libre 3 support, she said it's not far off. And then I know Omnipod's going to work with Libre 2. They haven't said anything about Libre 3. There's a lot of unknowns with the Omnipod 5 and CGMs. We don't have any dates. Real quick, let's touch on smartwatch and phone connectivity. So Medtronic has an app. Can you do anything on the app, or is it just for viewing things?
It's mainly for viewing data, just in a more detailed sense, and for syncing your data with their CareLink program, so that you can see reports and your clinicians can see reports.
Okay. Then you've got the Tandem and Mobi. Obviously, with Mobi, you need the smartphone app, but Tandem, the tslim, you can use the phone to also control it as opposed to using the...
Certain things, not everything. Like you can't program extended boluses through the phone app, but normal boluses can be done through the app.
And no smartwatch app for Tandem pumps, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Medtronic has one also, I think, just for viewing real quick. Right. Omnipod has an iPhone app coming out soon. No word on an Apple Watch app or any watch app. And then DIY Loop, and iAPS, which I've reported on a bit lately, both have iPhone. There's an Android one, and work on smartwatches. Now let's get into compatible insulins. There's Rapid, there's Novolog, Humalog, and then you've got Fiasp and Lyumjev. Tell me about those with these pumps. Can you use these ultra rapids with all of these pumps?
Most of them, yeah. I mean, I prefer to call them slow and slower. They're not really rapid insulins. Humalog, Novolog, Apidra, those are our traditional mealtime insulins. And then we have Fiasp and Lyumjev, which work slightly faster than Novolog and Humalog. It's enough to improve post-meal patterns a little bit. We don't spike quite as high. But they're still, a far cry short of the speed we really need for managing most meals. Humalog, Novolog, you can use in any pump. Apidra and Lyumjev, you can use without any issues, typically with the Omnipod and with the Medtronic. I don't know about iLet. I'm not sure if we can use the ultra rapids in it. But with Tandem's the question mark, because with the Tandem pump, there have been increased reports of occlusion alarms with use of Lyumjev and Fiasp. Not everyone has these kind of issues, though, and it might depend on how much insulin is being delivered through the course of the day. So I tell people who want to try it. If you don't have a problem, go for it. But if you start having issues with occlusion alarms or site issues, then go back to your regularly scheduled insulin that you've been using. Yeah,
just a note on the iLet, Fiasp will be able, I don't know if it already can be used or it will be. I know that that's a thing. I spoke to them about it. This next topic, I know a lot of people are curious about: pricing, the cost, and the differences, right? So I know that there's a difference between Omnipod and tubed pumps. What is getting on that on Omnipod? How does that look different?
All right. Well, price-wise, you got to consider upfront cost and long-term cost. The Omnipod has by far the lowest upfront cost because you're not buying any big, major, durable device. You're just buying a programmer and your startup pods. The pods are disposable. So you're looking at about $1,000 before insurance coverage to get started on an Omnipod. With a traditional tubed pump like Tandem and Medtronic, you're looking at $7,000 to $8,000 up front, and then the disposable supplies, up front might be a few $100s more. The iLet is a tube pump, but it's priced about half of what the others are. It's like $3,800, something like that. So the upfront cost, again, before insurance kicks in, is less with the iLet. But think beyond. We got to look beyond the end of our noses, and the long-term cost has to include the disposables. And with a tube pump, the disposables are relatively inexpensive. You're looking at maybe $100 a month, something like that. Whereas with the Omnipods, you're replacing a $40 pod every 3 days. So the ongoing cost goes up pretty quickly. After about 2.5 years of use, the total cost of using an Omnipod and the total cost of a tube pump with disposables is about the same. Beyond that point, the Omnipod starts costing you more. So you have to consider about what your insurance coverage is. If you have a big deductible, like a high deductible plan, then an Omnipod might make sense. If your insurance covers these things under the prescription drug plan, doesn't really matter. But the tube pumps are usually covered under durable medical equipment, and that's not going to get covered by your prescription plan. So I think a lot of it depends on how much of a deductible you have on your plan. If you have a low deductible, it's not going to matter that much. If you got a high deductible plan, the Omnipod financially could make sense for you the first couple of years. It'll end up costing you less.
Wow. It's crazy. Like, everyone's insurance is so different. So a lot of what you said, I don't even think necessarily fully apply to me, because I'm on Omnipod. I pay, I believe, $60 for a 3-month supply of Omnipods. I never had to do an upfront cost for a pump. And I like that because that's going through my pharmacy benefits. I can't imagine, throwing down a bunch of money. But I guess what I was expecting to hear is you buy that pump, but then also for these tube pumps, you need to get a monthly or a 3-month supply, which I was expecting to almost be the same price as my Omnipod for those 3 months without the pump. But I'm realizing everyone's insurance is, in this country, everyone has a different plan. So what applies to me is not going to apply to someone else, right?
I'd say every 3 days, that with a tube pump, every 3 days the disposables might cost about $15. Whereas with the Omnipod, every 3 days it's about $40 before insurance coverage kicks in. That's a big difference. But those who are having to pay a lot of it out of pocket, you got to consider that and consider how much you're willing to pay up front, and then long term, how much you're willing to invest.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of people just have to do the research to see the pricing difference, long term versus short term. For me, long term and short term, Omnipod just works. And I haven't looked into tube pumps though. What about warranties? So in the US, I know that you have a warranty when you get, I guess, mostly tube pumps. And I don't know about Omnipod. What does that look like?
Yeah, they're all about the same. They all have a warranty of about 4 years. If your insurance is Medicare, if it's a government type insurance, the warranty is typically 5 years. And that just means that you'll be eligible to have a brand new system paid for by your insurance once the warranty is up. Within the warranty period, it's the manufacturer's responsibility to keep your system up and functioning, either through repair, replacement, whatever the case might be. And in fact, as most people want to upgrade to something new because there's better features, it's cleaner. Those pumps get pretty beat up over time since you're wearing them every place. But I wouldn't ignore what I feel is the most important part of a pump investment is not the disposables or the pump itself. It's the training you get. It's the education you get and kind of the guidance that you receive. Because you can get the best system available if you don't know how to use it properly and you don't have good self-management skills. It's pointless. You could do worse than you did on injections. So working with a good clinician that knows their stuff makes all the difference.
Absolutely. Are there trial programs for any of these? Like, can someone just try it for free before they commit to a 4-year warranty?
Typically, they'll all allow you to return the system within 30 days. Again, don't quote me on this, but this has historically been the case with any pump you get. If you return it within 30 days, you get a full refund, or your insurance gets a full refund, and then you could switch if you wanted to. Now, with the Omnipod, since it's covered under a different aspect of the insurance, it's a little less risky because you can stop at any time and switch, and there's no long-term, $7,000 device you've invested in. So there's a little less risk involved using the pods.
Awesome. Gary, thank you so much. This was so interesting. I now know a lot more about these pumps and how they're compared, and I hope everyone listening does too. It's always great having you on the show, so we'll have to have you on again.
Sure. I've been impressed. I've been watching your glucose in the background. You've been between 113 and 115 the entire hour.
Yeah, that's IAPS. I'm using a new DIY system, and I don't know, my sugar level after a breakfast being that straight of a line, it's outrageous. Yeah. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you have any more questions, feel free to connect to Gary and his practice, Integrated Diabetes Services, and be sure to listen to my other episodes on all of these pumps. I've thrown some of those links in today's show notes. Also down there is a link to my Patreon. I truly value your support, and I can't wait to push Diabetic further and farther with you. Next week, we're talking about pregnancy and diabetes technology. Specifically, it's a two-parter. We're doing these studies that have come out recently about CGM accuracy and automated insulin delivery systems efficacy with pregnancy. And then a week from there, I speak with someone who was pregnant at a time when there was no diabetes technology. Truly fascinating. So stay tuned for that. New episodes of this podcast release every Monday wherever you listen and on YouTube. Links to my YouTube channel and social accounts are in today's show notes. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.